guys, Rex here. I am reporting from a winter disaster zone, official disaster zone, guys. The governor declared it an emergency disaster zone, and FEMA and all that's involved, I guess. So North Dakota, I don't know if it made it to the news or not. I have no idea. Lost power, not all of the state, but the part where I'm in. I was kind of right in the center of the bullseye on the power outage. A few thousand power poles got smoked by this winter storm up here. I think it was more of an ice storm, which is very, very strange around here. I think it's the first ice storm we've ever had in December in North Dakota, ever. Normally it's way too cold for that. So an ice storm came, took out a few thousand power poles, and I guess it takes them more than 5 minutes to fix that, right? And so here we are. And a bunch of the stuff has been restored now. Actually, our area is pretty much good to go. But we had about 4 or 5 days without electrons flowing through the lines. So that means if you're not having electrons imported and you depend on electrons, well, then what do, right? So much stuff is hooked onto the power. And so I had a question in from Mr. David. Yes, I do have the computer running, and I'll tell a story in a minute. Mr. David on Patreon. For those of you guys that like to ask questions, if you want to know about anything, if you sign up on Patreon, I do daily questions and answers for the patrons. So I will directly answer and read your question on Patreon, right? And some of them are pretty good. We talk about a lot of fun stuff. We just talked about nuclear winter the other day, right? So this is a little bit of a practice run for the nuclear winter, right? The natural disaster type deal, right? And yeah, we have a lot of fun there. So David is asking here, he's on a higher training level, Zulu. Question, low priority. Could you possibly give a walkthrough on how you're able to thrive during the power outage? And see, like, for the patrons, I don't even think I did a video on it yet until someone mentioned, hey, you should do a video on that. Okay, all right, I'll do a video. I did mention it in a post because comms were slowed down when the communications towers finally ran out of juice because their backups only go so far. So our backups outlasted the communication company's backups. They only had like 48 hours. So I was taking notes the whole time. Just taking notes the whole time, learning all kinds of stuff, writing down stuff I need to improve here, writing down kind of what the thresholds are elsewhere, how helpful the neighbors were. Man, that was a game changer. Absolutely. Everyone just was in a competition to try to help each other out, like tripping over each other, trying to be the first one to get to other people to make sure they're okay. Very, very nice area to live, right? Actually, it's terrible. You guys should never move here. Just terrible. Best kept secret, man. Yep, so how do you thrive during the power outage? Okay, we'll talk about that. Realizing this is a 2- and 3-dimensional physical problem rather than a spiritual one, mostly. Shalom and shivering are not ready partners. That's true. Sucks to be cold, although it will improve other aspects of your faith if you were to freeze. But no, it's not good for the shalom part. Not the physical shalom, okay? That's right. That word just means peace. Calm down, guys. I'm not making a political statement, okay? We have a wood stove, a wood backup generator, fuel, and gas. So we are almost good. But could you detail your longer-term strategies for colder climates, cooking, water, maintenance, etc.? Grid-down fantasies have been covered a million times on the internet, but a man with experience is never the fool of one with a theory. That's true, right? Absolutely true. It would be interesting to hear your perspective, maybe some of the things that worked and things that didn't. Okay, so to make a long story short, I'll kind of give you the timeline rundown. Sitting there all cozy in her house. I didn't even really, because I was nose to the grindstone, didn't even hear about the Molech Day power storm outage thing. The ice storm was inbound. And a bro had mentioned, he's like, hey man, there's an ice storm coming, I'm going to go and get my stuff squared away. So he goes and I'm like, ice storm, huh? So I look at the news which I rarely do, but the weather part, look at, yeah, that could be an ice storm. So I get my, I have some battery backup systems for critical immediate need equipment, okay? My profession, of course, is to project information on the computer to you all, right? That's my job. So I need to be able to do that. So electrons, maintaining some kind of electron flow for short, medium term deals is something I have covered ahead of time. Juice went out, not midnight, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Woke up, I hooked up a couple critical needs to this solar 1600 watt, maybe goal zero deal, just to kind of get through the night on a couple critical deals. Some people there's a variety of different things that some households might be very well to have in place. Like if you got old people in the house and they have medical equipment, stuff like that, you're going to need to keep that stuff running until you can kind of figure out a way past that. Now, it's going to be hard to sustain some of that. So optimally, you wouldn't need electrons flowing. But got that hooked up. Plus, as another brother outlined in Zulu on the training class, he mentioned, actually, it wasn't him. It was my neighbor mentioned it. He's like, hey, man, there's a difference between comfort and survival. Because they kept offering the use of their large generator to hook onto my power pole. And I was like, oh man, I don't think I need it. I think I'm okay. And he's like, no, if you want to be cozy and just run like normal, then we can hook this deal up. And so that's true. There is truth to that. And that power went out, didn't come back on for a solid 4 days, completely, totally out the whole time. Within a few hours, neighbors stopped over. Well, the neighbors right next door, they're an older couple, maybe in their 80s or something, I would guess. And they're just checking to see if we're okay, which is funny. I probably should have checked to see if they're okay, actually. So that was kind of a little bit of I got to have a better checklist when it comes to me checking on my neighbors, because I just kind of keep to myself out here. Me and the family keep to ourselves, right? Even though we have very nice, sweet neighbors, they stop by. And then about an hour or two later, I was going to go and reconfigure a couple deals for a potential, after we found out how big the outage was. And I saw across the street hundreds and hundreds of poles, as far as the eye could see, going out miles, just gone. I'm like, yeah, that's going to take more than a few hours to fix. And it is winter. So we're putting some other deals in place to keep the heat going. And the other neighbors swung by and they were offering help, which very, very nice people out here. They came over with all kinds of tools and stuff like, hey man, is there anything we can do for you? Very, very cool neighbors. So number one, living in an area where you did an area study on your 5D and 4D terrain features, your spiritual terrain. Very important. And I did that using U.S. Census Bureau demographics to find out which places in the world are most helpful, have good family values, have good, strong morals. You can find that out on the Census Bureau. How do you know? What people do. Crime statistics, marital statistics, how many children are raised by both mom and dad. Things like that are a big deal when you're looking at where you want to relocate. We talk about that a lot more on Patreon. So if you want to learn more about relocation beyond just beans and stuff like that, and putting on the resistance or whatever, if you want to talk about actual relocation in a realistic way that suits your 99% needs, your needs, right? Then you can join us on Patreon, okay? We talk about that stuff. That's like everyday kind of topic deal that we talk about. And that being said, we didn't need light. So we always roll with those headlamps, those little Energizer headlamp deals in our coat pockets and on every car. They have them on we hang them from the rear view mirror. So that, because stuff happens, man. You blow a tire or something happens to the car, you got to get on. it's nice to be able to have a lamp in both hands, right? And so we had those, and we didn't even really use those that much. I already have candles sitting out for our weekly period where we pause everything that we do every single week, right? And we do that on Friday nights. And so we got out our candles, we lit those suckers, and we had some books. Little guy played with his little toy helicopter or whatever. And it was actually nice to have some quiet, right? And when it came time to have to use my mass media super cannon deal, let me turn this light back on here. Hold on. Oh, well, it looks like it's going to be dark now. Well, it switched to dark mode. So when it looked like we're going to use our mass media super cannon, I just plugged that into the Goal Zero generator. And it doesn't matter what brand name, but it's a 1600 watt battery bank deal. And you can recharge it with solar and all that. It's pretty reliable. That went for 4 days, running it on minimum functions, just critical stuff, like extreme critical needs equipment and comm gear. That's it. Candles we used for light. One trick you can do with stuff that's in the fridge and it's cold is to put all your food in Tupperwares and just keep that in the car. You could potentially, although we didn't need to. We actually had enough, because I have a DeWalt power station too with all my DeWalt batteries. And so I used that. And I used that because I really wanted coffee the next morning. We used it for some stuff that first night. But then I wanted to do a full test run. I know how terrible batteries are with charging on a heating element. But we put her to the test, and it sure as hell ran that sucker into the ground. Just killed it. Dead, 100%, trying to make a pot of coffee, which is what I wanted to know. I wanted to know if I could make coffee, right? Everything else is covered. You can situate, so we have propane heat we have propane on site. I have like a decent amount of propane. I'm not going to tell you how much, but I have enough for a long time. If you did the math, it would make it through an entire winter, or it would make it through 2 winters if you just kept it, to where you wouldn't die and kept it not super cozy comfortable, but your body adjusts too. If you keep it 40 plus degrees in the coldest parts of the winter, you can stretch that propane out a lot longer. Some of the modern furnaces, like the one in this office of mine here, is a microvolt system. I specifically asked for that when they put it in. Brand new propane furnace, and it works better when the heating coil deals have a blower on them, but it'll technically work fine too if it'll run and keep it warm. It kept it cozy and actually sweaty in here the whole time. I had it cranked up to 70 degrees on a microvolt system. So that's where the actual gas pressure powers the thermostat function, and it just clicks it on and off as needed. And so that was our long-term strategy plan if we'd have a major long-term power outage, at least to get off, because propane is not sustainable. It's good for a cushion, but it's not sustainable after you run out of propane, if the world would really go down, right? But for if we just ran it in here, that might last a couple years with as much propane as we have on site and as well insulated as I made this little building that I'm sitting in now. So that was kind of our plan. It's comfortable in here. It's clean. Mama and the kiddos can come in here. I can do my stuff and maintain the other place or whatever. Heat is a big deal. Thank God it wasn't that cold here during this power outage. It wasn't that cold by North Dakota standards. It was very warm. It was still freezing, like 20s, I think it got down to 0 or something, but not quite 0, but not cold by North Dakota standards. So there's that. For the main furnace in the house, what you can do, because I tell you what, they don't sell the old stuff anymore like I had when I was a kid. I asked a bunch of HVAC guys, maybe you guys know about, there's some units called like the Cozy heaters, which are millivolt, but they're not they don't hook up to the ductwork. They don't run well without electricity because they like to have the blower, right? So there are space heater options you can get. I'm absolutely probably going to do that in the future here. Then you can have access to the house. But the problem is, the math problem is, in order to keep the entire large house warm with propane, you're going to burn through it quick. very quick. I mean, like in one winter, right? Because I fill up my stuff once, and it's good for the winter. Usually, I just buy it ahead of time, and gosh darn it, like there's a finite amount of time you have on that before you have to start using other systems. But you can use a normal furnace. Most of them are on a 110, 120 volt deal, 115 volt, whatever. So you can take the plug off, and what we did is jerry rig ours, like just kind of like take the wires out of the switch and then just put it onto a cord, and then you can run it to where you have your alternative power, right? And depending whether it's a gas generator or electric or whatever, you can just run it, and you heat the house up all the way cozy. And I timed it. You can turn it off, and after 12 hours at about an average of 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, 12 hours, it only drops down to the lower 60s. So my place, being old and not as well insulated as I'd like it to be, kept relatively cozy for 12 hours just on running it once. So you don't need to continuously run stuff. You can just run it when you need it, right? And with other, like the deep freeze, if it was a 4-day outage, right? That it ended up being, we didn't know if it'd be, they said it could be 2 or 3 weeks. It only ended up being like 4 or 5 days. If you had to, you can move meat outside and let it freeze. But I'm lazy. And I don't want to if I don't have to. So I was expending all of our on-site power options first. Like, okay, we'll try to, so we swap between the refrigerator and the freezer. Now, is that sustainable? Is that a long-term option? It is not. So here's some TLOs. Gas-powered generators are great for the very short term, but if you run out the numbers, you're going to go through a lot of gasoline. It's going to be very expensive to keep your power on. Like after a week or two, you're going to be like, I could have stayed at a hotel. If you run a big generator, if you figure out how much gasoline costs, right? If you're burning 20 gallons a day, what does gas cost nowadays? What does a hotel cost, right? How much gasoline can you store on site? Some guys have huge, farmers out here have huge gasoline stockpiles. Most of them have 500-gallon tanks or larger on site in diesel tanks. But you got to look at the cost. And if it's a short-term disaster, well, man, you want to get through it as cheap as possible too, right? So your generator options are great to keep life normal and cozy, quote unquote, for your short-term stuff. Like this was a 4-day power outage is nothing really. I mean, it's like very short-term. Now, some other places might disagree with that went through a power outage for a week or whatever, like in recent history. But up here, we're geared for that a little more, maybe, right? Just how stuff is built. And our pipes are like actually not on the outside of the house, right? And so for long term, we'll get in that'll be a whole separate topic in a minute, okay? What else did you ask? Could you detail the longer term for colder climates? We never had to bust out the long-term stuff. Not for a 4-day event. For a 4-day event, we had candles. You have solar backup generators to run critical communications equipment. It's funny, after 48 hours, I think I mentioned this, power went out on the communications tower. So I called the comms company and I said, hey man, is it my end that is not working or is it your end that's not working? Like, what do you mean? You have power? I'm like, yeah. And like my stuff is working, my antenna's working. I have directional antenna for my internet stuff so that I can work, right? I gotta work. And their backup generators, man, only had 48 hours of power. It's like, okay, that's good to know. Write that one down, right? Because you're gonna lose comms after 48 hours, right? And out here, it was, I think, in order to squeak out a text to continue work, and to just grab enough of a signal. See, pace planning was a big deal with my work too. So if I have work pre-done ahead of time on the internet stuff, so all the big uploads are already done way ahead of time, I have a big bank months in advance, potentially about a month in advance of full pace. If I slow down my pace, I can stretch out 2 or 3 months. I learned that from Brother Saw. right? He mastered the gun of doing this gig too, so that he could help me out. But absolutely, like I learned that one from him. Like that's a great idea, because then you're not reliant on trying to upload full bandwidth projects or whatever onto the computer. So I had most of my work done ahead of time for an emergency stash, right? And so all I had to do was squeak out just a tiny signal to transfer the link to this file onto the Patreon or whatever, right? And that worked great. But I had to drive a few miles to squeak out enough signal to get a full bar. But that's by design. I live out here for that reason too, so that I can just turn everything off and have shalom if I need to. Just like when the day comes where I'm going to pull the plug, I don't need signals flying everywhere for no reason, right? So those, I never did go into any of my long-term stuff out here. Was able to just maintain, like gas generators, very short-term, but very nice, very handy. Solar generator is a long-term option, but it's very limited, especially depending on your size of your unit. I was talking to a bro of mine who's on the Zulu, actually higher level than Zulu training on Patreon. And he specializes in kind of the field of emergency power. And you can spend $75,000 and then get a 30,000 kilowatt, whatever, solar deal in certain parts of the country. But gosh darn it, it's expensive, right? So solar is a potential longer term deal, but eventually your power converters wear out, or all the equipment that transfers the solar bank into the battery and controls the power. Eventually the panels wear out. I know they might last 30 years supposedly, but man, that stuff doesn't last forever. So it's a long-term option, but not a permanent option. Okay, so gas generators are extreme short-term. Solar is a bit longer, potentially, if you got it set up right. And so you could use that for your furnace. If you just use your furnace to bump it up to comfortable and then just let the house cool down and just kind of like, do that as needed, right? Kind of, okay, turn it on now. Let's go. Let's heat it up. All right, now let's turn it off, right? And you can do that with the solar deal if that's what all you're using it for. But if you're trying to watch freaking Oprah or, crank up the guitar amp or, play video games or whatever, you play Mario Kart during the power outage, which I could have actually, right? It might not be as good of a plan, right? And so there's that. And I guess I have an acoustic guitar, so that wasn't a problem because I can just play that. I don't need a lot, really. Let's talk long-term. Okay, so you're asking me about long-term. Well, this is a field of expertise to where I have I have one brother for sure that would be way more of an expert than me on that. Brother Saw has been doing a lot of stuff for a long time. And so if you want to think of like long-term sustainment options, I can tell you what my current philosophy of that is right now, what I'm working towards. And if you want full instruction, he might be a good source to hit up as well. Obviously, better than me, and he has a lot more experience in different areas. But for North Dakota, man, I'll tell you what, heating is huge. If you live in Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, it's kill you cold up here. It's kill you cold. Like it's not an option not to have some kind of heat. You'll die, right? It's like well over 30 below in January. It's January now, right? And so you're going to need a permanent long-term heating option. So what can that be? Around here, I have neighbors that exclusively heat their homes on wood because there is enough trees out here, believe it or not, to feed that sucker wood, okay? And so with all the different tree rows that people have all around their houses and stuff, there's plenty of wood to go around for at least a while if you're like the only person on the block doing it. And there's such low population density where I'm at. I think I'm not going to tell you the number, but it's very low population density where I'm at. So there'd be more trees per person to go around, right? And if you had a sled or something like that to where you could move wood without hurting yourself with no cars or no tractors, then you have an option there, okay? You'd want old school saw, that you can use, like the old loggers used with the 2-man saws. I've used those when I was a kid, and the old school tools, axes and stuff like that to fall a tree or whatever. And you'd keep busy with dead stuff at first, though, because nobody burns wood anymore. There's plenty of wood on the ground. So that is an option. So I do have a old cowboy cook stove, flat top that you can cook on with wood heat, because that's permanently sustainable. I mean, unless all of a sudden everyone I couldn't imagine to where all the trees would be gone. You know what I mean? There's different parts of North Dakota that have 0 trees, but out here there's a lot. Coal is a great option. So if you look pound for pound, man, but next to wood, if you live where there's trees, coal is by far the cheapest way to stockpile power in terms of BTUs. I think that I estimated in my black, or not the, what do they call that? The dark winter episode on Patreon. I'll leave a link to that for the patrons. We'll have the link to it. Logistics form, the dark winter logistics sheet. It has all your different heating options. You can plug in whatever heating option it is. You plug in the BTUs per pound, and then you plug in the price, and it's all the math is already done. And then you click for like how many BTUs your house consumes, and I have a video explaining how to use the form. And it'll give you a good idea of kind of what you would need to acquire if you want pre-stored fuel options, right? And I went over fuel oil is extremely expensive at the moment, way to do it. I went over propane is a bit cheaper, even though, because you got to figure out how many BTUs it makes. It's not just a gallon conversion, how many BTUs it makes per pound or gallon or whatever the units are. And then you got to cross-check units and price. So basically, how many BTUs per dollar do you have, okay, in a system? And then how many dollars would you need per year? And then how would you store that based on how much land you have and what your storage options are? So for me, I also have a potbelly coal stove that's good for bituminous coal, but I could also use lignite lump coal if I wanted to. Lignite is a lot more corrosive. It'll be like really hard on your furnace or your stove. But if a guy could get a truckload of bituminous coal, which you can buy, it's a lot more expensive than lignite. I think lignite is $35 a ton here in North Dakota. You'd want to truck it in advance, and you can just throw it on the ground and throw a tarp on it. You can have a mountain of coal in your yard and just throw a tarp on it, or not throw a tarp on it. It will spontaneously combust if it gets too wet, and if there's too much in a pile. But if you throw a tarp on it and keep it dry, you're fine. But you can put it in a grain elevator. I got a couple grain elevators. If I piled coal in my grain elevator 3 feet deep, which is not even that much, I can heat my home for 7 years for a couple $1,000s on my coal stove. So that is the entire Great Tribulation span time, the 7-year tribulation, right, guys? Yeah, just on coal. So coal is a great option, extremely low tech, impervious to EMP. I don't think I should call the frickin' stove company, U.S. Stove or whatever that sells the potbelly stoves, be like, hey guys, is this model a coal burning stove with no electric shit on it from the 1800s? Do you think that's EMP proof? They'd either start laughing or they'd hang up. I actually had those coal guys are serious. They hanged up on me last time I was being funny. Like, what the hell you were doing? But coal is a great option, okay? I have fuel oil still in place too with a 270-gallon tank in the shop for the tractor because I need mega flamage to melt the ice off when I use it in the winter. I just crank it up and it's like a volcano for a minute. And then once it's melted off the tractor, I turn it off, right? So I have a fuel oil. I got propane. I do have electric backup for the propane as well. Because what if the propane goes up but the electric works? Overlapping layers for when different parts of the infrastructure are not working, okay? And then for your permanent long-term options, coal is the best one, especially if it's in your area where you can continue to resupply. Then it's really awesome. Coal might be the best one if you're just trying to cheaply store up ahead of time a lot of energy for a fixed amount of time. You can store a lifetime's worth of coal for not that much money. And guess what? You know where they found coal? On the ground, in the ground. So you don't even need to worry about that part. You just basically, you don't need a special box to put it in or anything like that. Just keep it on the ground. Trees are also outside, so you can stack cords of woods for a long time. You know, per cubic volume, coal is a lot more BTUs per cubic volume than trees, right? Bituminous is a lot more. And then, you know, lignite's kind of dirty and not as good. And then anthracite's really good. So you got to see what your stuff is rated for. And yeah, candle will work. I also have kerosene backup. You see, for winter where it's really cold, I want every freaking option on the table so that if a truck drives by and drops a 55-gallon drum of whatever, I can use it. So I have kerosene as well, right? Which is also good for lanterns. So you can buy kerosene by the 35-gallon and 55-gallon drum for extremely cheap. Way cheaper than in those little bullshit cans. And so you just put a hand pump on there. I got a hand pump on there. I've had that for years. And you can have a huge amount of kerosene for your lanterns and for your kerosene heaters. When I was in Asia in the winter in the third world, a lot of people have just a little tiny kerosene heater, and man, they keep cozy around that thing. Put it right in the middle of the living room. Now be careful. You don't want to gas yourself and you don't want to light everything on fire. There is a learning curve. Even with the kerosene lantern, you can light everything on fire. Like in the cowboy movies, you knock it over. That's not good, right? So layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And your sustainment option is going to be whatever you can acquire in your gates. I can acquire wood in my gates. I cannot acquire coal in my gates. I can acquire coal from down the road a ways if I have comms and if they'll trade money for it and if the trucks are running the highways open. So coal will only work for me in my area if I stockpile it ahead of time, right? And so wood is probably the most easily sustainable system because you can plant trees if you don't have them, or you can use trees in your area, if assuming you have trees to burn, okay? So it depends on where you're at and what you're doing. In Western Dakota, coal in Wyoming and stuff like that, Eastern Montana, coal is a great option because there's not as much trees, and coal is just literally right under your feet. So they would just have coal mines everywhere. And like each local town had its little coal supply, you know, in the old days. And so that is a long-term maintenance option. Your electrons, if you got special equipment you need to run, like if you need to recharge your radios, your lights, your magical devices, like your see stuff at night devices, you know, like all of us guys have, then having a backup solar deal is a heck of a good option, as is a wind deal if you have wind in your area, like, or a bicycle. Right? Something to turn it into something you can generate power and charge batteries. And so books on how to do that, and then do it ahead of time. Don't assume you can throw it together. You need to go to the hardware store while the hardware store is open, okay? And as for me, I mean, I've been running my little solar unit for 5 years or something like that now, just for hobby stuff. So like I've run like stereos on it and guitars and all kinds of other stuff on it, having a pretty good idea that it's reliable. And we only went down to 45% capacity on the battery on that over 4 days. So it's pretty good when you just use it for what you need it for, right? So grid down fantasies, yeah, cooking, long-term strategies for cooking and water maintenance. So cooking, here's my plan, okay? I'll just bounce this off of you guys, ready? All right. My plan is to look at the homesteaders, which I've already done, like, because I hear the stories about great grandpa, right? And I'm going to do it like that. So up here, sod houses were a thing. So idealistically, an earthen home would be great. If I can save up my pennies and get an extremely efficient earthen home, it's like under the dirt. Man, is that a great idea. Okay? And then you can have a lantern with a few 55-gallon drums, stuff that you can use only when you need it. Right? And you can have light for a long time if you have a lantern and a lot of oil. And then for cooking, one of the old cast iron, the Amish still make them in Minnesota, I believe. Cook stoves with the movable iron plates is the way to go, I think, because they would just run that all winter to keep the house warm, and it wouldn't take much to just keep it cozy. And it's always hot. And then when you want to boil water, you just put it on there. When you want to cook an egg, you just put it on there. If you need it hotter, well, then you just load it up more, right? And so cooking, you're using that power anyways for heating the house, right? So it's all in one unit, and it lasts for a long time. And so then you just need wood. But then you would need sharpening equipment, an abundance of good quality tree cutting tools, and you'd want to start doing that with your kids ahead of time so that your kids know how to do it, so that, when the thing happens, you can have a labor force continue to maintain it. And yes, you want to have a stockpile ready to go ahead of time, because there's going to be a lot of other stuff you're trying to patch up and work on if the big nightmare scenario would ever hit, right? So long term, I think those cook stoves are a great option. Like from the old days, you can do rocket stoves, and Brother Saw would have so much more different angles of intersection of other ideas that you could do with that. But I just look at how did the natives do it, right? And around here, they either lived in earthen structures, like the ones that were in the Great Plains, like the Mandan, and they had just a small amount of heat required to keep cozy in the winter. And then that's how the pioneers rolled too, right? They had absolute, good insulation with their earth homes, their sod houses. And I'm not going to build a sod house, but it'll be a concrete, reinforced, earthen covered deal. There's guys that specialize in building them around here. They're not that much more, but that's a few years out. So one of those geared up with that. Your water options out here. My water table is 93 inches deep. Or not my water table, but my freeze line. When it's winter happens, it's 90 inches deep where I'm at. Very, very cold. That changes a huge amount based on exactly where you're at in the country. Guys are like, oh, I'm in Nebraska. It's way different. Yeah, Nebraska is way different. Look at a freaking map. It's on maps. Like, you don't need to argue with me. You just need to look at a map to see what your zone is for how deep it needs to go. So I already have a guy lined up. I already have my old well. I have a couple options. I have an old well that they used for 100 years before there was power out here. See, they didn't even have electricity on this farm until probably the 1940s. And this is way older than the 40s where I'm at now. They had a big old school well that you could fall into with a bucket. And when you get that deep down, it's 35 feet down or whatever, then you can scoop water out on a bucket. So I have that in place. I can literally lower a bucket in there, right? So I have the rope in the bucket and maybe build a little pole with the crank and the little roof, so stuff don't fall in there. Right now I have it covered up with a lid, and I just got an electric pump for convenience use for my orchard. But the other one I would like to do is a solar powered well. Some of those are really cool. They last for a long time. Some of those pumps should last forever if you run them right. Not forever, but like as longer than I will, just to have that convenience cushion sake to transition over to the other ways. And rain catchment, we have 58-gallon food grade olive barrels placed under the roofs, all the steel roofs and stuff like that. So with the spouts and all that stuff to grab the water when it does rain. Probably a really good option would be to create at some point a small dam, like a stock pond, create a pond out here, which would be very easy to do. You have to check your soil. I have some gravelly soil and some sandy soil in the middle, but the other stuff's loamy. So you might have to line it with bentonite clay. But the well that I'd put in would have all the equipment below that frost line. So they go down, I think they go about 10 or 12 feet down, install all the stuff there, and then topside. And I know a bunch of ranchers that have been running them since I was a kid, and they're still running on those same solar units. It's been 30 years, and they're still running strong for their cattle. And so I figured that's pretty darn good. And then what you do is you have spare parts. The spare whatever component breaks down, that's the part we're going to grab. So then you can plumb that into the house. Actually, this other well, the old one does have plumbing hooked onto the house. There are lines about 10 or 12 feet under the ground that go to the barn and go to the house. So a guy could theoretically plumb it into there, but they're pretty old lines. But I would just redo the brand new construction, dug well. They're a little expensive with the solar and with the excavation to put it into a house with the pumps at the depth of the water table in my area. It will be around $30,000. Okay, so it's like a new car. But hey, you know what? I like drinking water. I like water. So that's the way to get water, is a multitude of different options, right? So catch the rain, have a well that you can use a bucket on, that you can literally go down there with a ladder or a rope, and then have another well that's, you can use modern equipment on that one. So that's at least 3. That's your primary, alternate, contingency. And actually, I do have rural water as well, so that would actually be the primary because it's convenient, right? Contingency, emergency, right? All that kind of stuff. So that's the water plan. And of course, in the winter, there is an abundance of freaking snow around here, so that's good for the winter time, right? And in the summer, you can grab water ahead of time too. And then you could also pump those wells and always keep a huge reserve on hand for when it does dry down. Those systems, I have a cistern, I think it's 20 feet deep and 10 feet across, so 10 by 20 cistern right next to the house with a gravity-fed spigot. And then you can put a line on there and then hand pump it out. It has an old pump from the 1930s on it right now, the big wheel that pumps the water out. So then you can take the water off the roof and put it into the cistern. You want to be careful not to fall in that damn thing, because you would get stuck in there. It would be terrible, right? But yeah, cooking, water, maintenance. I wouldn't consider our disaster in North Dakota to be a disaster or even a prepper deal. It's just an inconvenience. It's nice to have the convenience of a generator for a short-term deal for like 4 days or whatever. Made it stupid easy, right? Furnace is running. All you got to do is babysit the thing for a minute, have a few electric backups. It wasn't even really a test, just a week-long deal, right? Because it's not life-threatening long-term deal. The challenge will be the sustainable options. However, when you realize what they actually are, by looking at what your great-grandparents did, when you look at those sustainment options, they're very simple. Wood-burning cook stove, check. Dirt for walls. I mean, I was mentioning this on a Patreon video today that we're talking about this topic in a Zulu class. My grandfather came here off a train in 1898 or 1901, Homesteading Act, with a suitcase. He walked out 20 miles off the railroad tracks, found a stake in the ground where hardly anybody was, very remote there even now to this day, right? There's like one neighbor a couple miles away. And he found a stake in the ground, and he had his acreage, so all he had was a huge patch of dirt and a suitcase. He came from freaking Pennsylvania. And with that suitcase, whatever tools he had in there, which I think he had like food and tobacco, he walked over to the neighbor's house and said, "Hey, I'll trade work to let me borrow your tools." And the neighbor was a similar heritage. So, oh man, it's good to have a good neighbor out here. A good neighbor and the will to just do whatever you need to do to survive. A good neighbor is the ultimate prepper item. It is. It's what saved our ass up here. Everyone out here helped each other. And when my grandfather came out, he walked down there and, "Hey, can I borrow your, blade for cutting sod? I want to build a sod house." So he built his own sod house like in the first week, right? Okay, I'll save up for windows later. Right now, we'll just shove animal skins in the windows. And then after a year, he had his first crop. He paid for some glass windows, put them in there. Then he could send home for mama to come from the East Coast with the kids and come to freaking North Dakota with no electricity on a farm he built with his bare hands almost in the winter. You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of deal that you got to just come to grips with. Survival is not something to hit on a freaking app for Amazon. It's not buying shit and putting it on the shelf. There's a huge difference between the prepper sphere version of survival, which is to just buy items and throw money at it and just set it on the shelf. That's not sustainable. That shit's going to be gone. Do the math. How long does it take before it's gone? Now what do? You didn't utilize maximum efficiency and transitioning over into your sustainable systems, doing it that way. It's all a fantasy unless you do it ahead of time, right? But the magic of the sustainable way to do it is just once you're set up, and it'll take a generation or two to learn it. Israel had to do it on their way out of Egypt. They were in Egypt's industry before that. They were building stuff for the pharaohs. They were making bricks. They were literally industrial workers, slave workers in Egypt. And they had to go into the wilderness and figure it out. And they had access to the superpower weapon of prepping, which most of your prepper sphere doesn't even want to think about that now either, do they? Which is, hey, if you have proper alignment, he'll feed you when, and they still had their sheep and their chickens and their goats and all that stuff, right? And they still were, they had their little fruit trees that they carried with them. But I'll tell you what, if you miss out on the actual gold of experience from humankind, your systems are not going to be sustainable. And so I hope, man, this is a long video for YouTube. I normally do not put these things on YouTube. This is going to be on YouTube as well, I think. So this Patreon question I will put on YouTube as an invitation for anyone out there on YouTube. If you like this conversation, if you like to understand more and join our incredible community of awesome folks, not just myself, but have access to my brothers too, right? And I'll share their channels below as well, who do a great job at this. It's I was talking about this on Patreon as well too, but you can't just buy medicine and put it on the shelf. It's not going to last. When you use it up, it's gone forever. What you need to invest your time and money into, if you're wise, is what Patriot Nurse is doing with her herb classes or her medicine. You can grow the medicine. You learn about plants and stuff, the old school knowledge, and you can grow your medicine in your garden. And it's every bit as good and way better than your store-bought, synthetically made copycat versions of what God already put on this earth in his wisdom. God, in his great wisdom, put everything we need on this earth to be self-sustaining. All we need to do is look over and grab it. And if you don't know, then you need to learn. You need to sell everything you have and acquire wisdom from people like that. You need to sell everything you have, all your prepper gear, and go take a class from her, take a class from Brother Saw. You can sign up on my Patreon and acquire wisdom. You will save hundreds of thousands of dollars and the lives of your progeny going into the infinite future. People that do not get back into touch with the Creator and his survival systems are going to be called out by just the natural consequences of the foolish attitude that we can't learn nothing from nobody. I'll just buy stuff and put it on the shelf. That's what 14-year-old girls do, is they think every problem in life can be solved by hitting the buttons on their phone, right? They just hit these buttons on the phone I have an app for when I have an emergency. Help! Help! Rex, help! Okay, do you have an app for when your car breaks? Yeah, it's the AAA app. Help! Help! Dude, it's not sustainable. Okay? So I hope you find this video to be good and exciting and helpful and all that kind of stuff. This is a freebie for you YouTube guys. And for the patrons, God bless you guys. I appreciate your support. Thank you for participating in the value exchange here. And as part of that value exchange, if you have any other questions like David had here, I will answer it for you on Patreon, okay? And we will continue to enjoy the exclusive company of such awesome people over there. So I learn more than you guys do just from hanging out with you there. High quality individuals. So that's what I always liked about the classes as well, meeting all kinds of good people. So if you guys can catch up, come hang out with the community, we welcome you to come check it out. It's cheaper than a cup of coffee for the VSL level. 83 cents a day, man. If you can't figure out 83 cents a day to save $50,000 a minute from having wisdom, then I don't even know where to start. I can't afford 83 cents. Okay, so get your gas station coffee and then lose. Like, man, if you look at the direction people spend their coin on their preps, man, oofta. Just like the most inefficient possible way to do anything. Every choice. You know what I'm saying? What's a better emergency food? You guys tell me. A bucket with black and yellow stripes on it that says emergency food. Zero mission turbo, like nuclear bomb proof emergency food, like with yellow reflective tape on it. Or, which is like, how much does that damn thing cost? I got a lot of them. I got a couple years of that stuff. Or you take a seed and you throw it in the ground and you poke at it and you throw it into the hole and you kick dirt over the top of it. How about that? And then you just keep doing that until you have a forest of hazelnuts, apples, walnuts, Juneberries, Saskatoons, plums. That's what I'm doing. Why? Because God already invented a survival food system. It's called a seed. You throw it in the ground and it grows. And then you foster it. And then you don't have to farm, see? And then I don't have to bend over and plow fields every day when I'm 90 years old. I can just literally go out and grab an apple. And at a different time of the year, I can go out and grab a plum. And then when it's all about to rot, I make a huge amount of wine out of it. And then I sit here all winter and eat my freaking wine and drink my wine. And then I get a yak out here. And then I make cheese out of the yak's cheese. And then I shoot the yak in the face and eat it. And I make yak lasagna. Yak style lasagna. How about that? Some chickens that continuously reproduce and eat all the bugs out of your yard. Or you can put chicken in a can and put it on a shelf. And then once it's gone, it's completely gone. Huh? And the chicken's your alarm system too. I mean, like, come on, man. How did people survive for all these thousands of years before we got here, huh? You know, before we got to this like helpless digital app pushing 14-year-old girl mode, dude. It is ridiculous. Purchase wisdom, man. We're looking at ancient time-proven systems. And Rex is 100%. I did not even drink any beer yet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause this video. I'm going to upload this on YouTube. And then I'm going to have a Brewski Hour episode for my patrons. And we're going to talk about something hilarious. I'm going to yell at Paul. What do you guys want me to yell at? I haven't even been watching the news. We'll figure it out when I get there. So we'll catch you on Patreon for Brewski Hour. And maybe at some point we'll do a live one where we can just have Q&A. That'd be fun. Okay, rock and roll. Bless you guys. Rex out.